Hi, so it's a pleasure for me to be here to conduct this interview with a colleague from mine from Rose Bruford College, Sidcup, Kent. My colleague is Julian Jones. Julian is an acting teacher at Rose Bruford. He is here to carry out workshops with theatre studies students who are following a course titled Tradition and Transmission in Performance. This particular unit takes Stanislavski's system as a case study to investigate how theatre traditions are formed and consolidated via processes of transmission. So the idea is to see the link between tradition building and transmission processing. Julian here is giving the second series of workshops following a three-part course that we are delivering with students, where his work is also paralleled with Alessio Bergamo workshop again on Stanislavski's system, and Jakub Korczak from the Damu School of Performing Arts in Prague. So Julian, welcome and thank you very much for your work today with our students. What I would like you to do, first and foremost, I would like you to introduce yourself a little bit more formally, especially your background of work and your formation as an actor, performer, and eventually teacher.
Okay. Well, I was first brought into the idea of becoming an actor because my brother, who's an actor in England, who's 20 years older than me, so from the age of about 6, I was introduced to what looked like a very exciting profession from the outside, certainly to the eyes of a 6-year-old. So I probably decided I wanted to become an actor when I was 6, probably. I applied for drama schools in the mid-1980s in Britain and eventually got a place accepted onto the acting programme at RADA in 1984. I trained at RADA from 1984 to 1986. It was then a diploma degree in those days, not a diploma rather than a degree course in those days. I then worked as an actor, predominantly in the theatre, I would suppose, although I did a fair bit of television as well, but primarily in the theatre, for 20 years, between 1986 and 2006. And in 2006 I was offered a post as a lecturer in acting at Rose Bruford Drama School in England, as Stefan said, and I've been there since 2006. I still act more in the recent years, so I probably do 2 acting jobs a year alongside my work at Rose Bruford. At Rose Bruford I teach first years, and the system that we use at Rose Bruford is probably the same as it is in most English drama schools, particularly the first years based on Stanislavski's system, and those who followed Stanislavski over the past 100 or so years, particularly when approaching naturalist, realist texts, but not only, as my workshop today was looking at the application particularly of the magic if, of Stanislavski's idea of the magic if, as applied to absurdist texts, and also to some of the texts of Howard Barker, thinking about which particular tools would be useful when approaching those types of dramaturgy. As well as teaching Stanislavski's system at Rose Bruford, my particular interest is in Sanford Meisner's work. I also teach, in the second year I teach Shakespeare, approaches to Shakespeare, and I also run the contextual study module that runs through the 3 years of the training at Rose Bruford. So it's quite a kind of eclectic mix. Probably the thing I'm most interested in, or what's become increasingly interesting for me, is the study of dramaturgy. So I teach the first year actors 2 classes a week on dramaturgy in the second semester. But really my heart in Stanislavski, I think that was the most important discovery for me as a young actor, was particularly the ideas of objective, obstacle and action within given circumstances, leading to my second revelation was working on Meisner's technique when I was working as a professional actor was at the Birmingham Repertory Theatre I first came into contact with Meisner's technique, and the idea of living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. So the two things fit very nicely to me. I suppose from Stanislavski's system, the idea of pursuing an objective, overcoming an obstacle and playing action was the most powerful idea for me. And from Meisner's work, the idea that one is responsive to the other actor and you're responding to an outside stimulus, outside of yourself, was the second epiphany in my acting career, I guess.
Thank you. In fact, you already mentioned a little bit the work that you have been doing here with theatre studies students, and I would like you to expand a little bit on the work that you did here. Just a little bit of logistical introduction. You had 2 sessions of 2 hours each, and it was very clear the way you were structuring them. As you said, you were structuring them leading towards the work on the absurdist text. So if you could expand a little bit.
So the thing that Stefan had asked me to work on was the use of the magic if. One of the things that's interested me at working at Rose Bruford is the progression of dramaturgical texts that we work with the students on over the course of the first 2 years of the training. In the first year, we work primarily on naturalistic texts, and in the second year, we tend to work on a series of non-naturalistic texts, particularly the absurdists, but also Brecht, Barker, and certain other writers. And one of the things that interests me is what the students can bring from their first year of training in terms of the Stanislavski system. What tools are still useful to them when working on absurdist texts and other non-naturalistic texts, or particularly theatrical texts. Certain things possibly get in the way, or certainly I've seen our students struggle when trying to apply certain ideas. For example, a character biography. Writing a character biography, if you're doing Waiting for Godot, doesn't get you very far, I don't think. But certain other tools, certainly the playing of action, the pursuing of objectives, the listening and responding, all those things apply, I think, almost independently of the nature of the text. And certainly I've discovered in recent years that using the magic if is a particularly useful way of approaching these non-naturalistic texts. So, for example, one of the scenes I set up with the students to work here in Malta, one of the scenes was from Pinter's The Homecoming, and there's a conversation between 2 working-class London uneducated characters. One of them, one of these 2 brothers is particularly uneducated, and yet, because of the nature of the text and the nature of the way Pinter writes and what he's interested in, particularly in power exchanges, this character, uneducated working-class character, is able to talk eloquently about philosophy, about theism and ontology and the nature of being. You shouldn't be able to have that vocabulary. So one of the thing that gave me the idea for this workshop was applying the magic if to that scenario where these 2 brothers basically are jockeying for power positions. It's a battle of status between 2 brothers, and particularly in terms of maleness or machismo. And so my first idea of how to go about exploring that scene using the magic if was to get the actors to, rather than think about having this argument about the nature of ontology, which they shouldn't be able to do, I thought, what if they were instead down the pub, it's very English this, at the pub with a pint of beer, discussing football and discussing who the best football team in the English Premier League is, for example. So although they're having a conversation about philosophy, they're talking as if they're talking about who's the best football team in the Premiership, while having a pint of beer in the pub. So the idea then is to plug directly into the actor's imagination and to find a situation where the essence of the battle, of the argument, the working class struggle for dominance, particularly in a very kind of a male setting, was in one that was more typical to the male working class environment of whenever The Homecoming was written, 1960s, I think, 70s, I can't remember. And so that analogy, the what if, rather than talking about philosophy, we're talking about football. How does that affect the behaviour and the physicality and things like eye contact? How does it change the actor's way of behaving and way of engaging with the other actor, so that they could release themselves from any idea of having an intellectual argument about philosophy, but rather it was a visceral, animal battle for supremacy. So that was the thing that gave me the initial spark for the workshop. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought of different ways that the magic if could be applied to a variety of different absurdist texts, and then also to some of Barker's texts. I'm trying to think which was the most effective one in the Barker scene. So there's a scene from Barker's Possibilities, where one of the characters is an ambassador for the state. It's a totalitarian state, and there's a female official, talking to a female citizen of that state who has refused to wear the stipulated state decreed a dress, which is just a boiler suit. And instead she asserts her right to wear a skirt and high heels and wear makeup. And it's an argument about whether this is justified in this totalitarian regime, or whether she is purposely causing distress by her wearing makeup and wearing a skirt and high heels and exposing her ankles. So I gave the two actors a series of what-ifs. For the officer, I asked her, for the official, the state official, I asked her to think about what disgusts her most in the world, what she found most sexually arousing, and what she found, I can't remember what the third one was, most disgusting. Maybe there was three arguments like that: most baffling, most arousing, and most disgusting. And for the woman, the three arguments: one that was something that she found most amusing in her life, something that she found made her most angry in life, and something that made her most fearful, perhaps. So I asked, in terms of using the magic if, this is about the idea of particularization, personalization, finding particular personal things that are true to you, that you find really disgusting, or really amusing, or really arousing, or whatever it is. And so rather than arguing about what the text is arguing about, to find equivalents from your life. The idea being that through the magic if you get straight to the immediately, without there being much of a gap, straight to the emotional and the imaginative truth, by finding something that personally is meaningful to you in the present tense. I guess in a way it's an attempt to get to the heart of something in the same way that music does, I suppose. I always find a very quick way when I'm working with actors on emotional connection, particularly, the quickest shortcut to the emotional juice of a scene, I often find is through music. It bypasses the intellect. And so the principle is the same, that through the use of if, what if, we get straight to the imaginative or the emotional, personal truth for that individual. And it's got to be meaningful to you personally here, today, now, as Stanislavski would say. So yeah, as I say, we worked on 4 different texts, 1 from Pinter, 1 from Ionesco, and 2 from Barker. And we were going to look at 1 from Beckett as well, which we didn't get to. And as we worked, the idea was to find the most effective exercises that would act as a shortcut into the imaginary what if. I think we knew when it worked most, because I think the actors started to work from instinct rather than from the idea, probably.
I am particularly interested because you mentioned terminology, which I always find it's a daunting sometimes concept, but if it is well weaved in the work, it can be quite helpful for the actors, to understand what the instruction is. And as you said, you mentioned terminology like substitution, personalization, and particularization. The interesting thing is that while I can very easily draw a link between this terminology and the Stanislavskian concepts, or the origin of the concept is certainly Stanislavskian, the terminologies in Russian would be completely different, would be very different. So I was wondering if you have any knowledge, any awareness of from where these terms are coming, where maybe you encountered them for the first time.
I think probably it's the American influence. It's probably had the greatest effect on my terminology, I think, in recent years. The kind of direct lineage, I think, pretty much for me was because I trained as an actor at RADA. While I was at RADA, although I wasn't taught directly by her, her influence was powerful at the time in the acting course at RADA, was Doreen Cannon, and Doreen Cannon was taught by Uta Hagen, who was taught by Stella Adler, who obviously was encountered Stanislavski. So that would be the lineage, I suppose. I think a lot of the vocabulary I've picked up on has come from Uta Hagen and from Sanford Meisner, and also from a guy called Larry Silverberg, who's a Meisner devotee. Bill Esper as well, another Meisner devotee. So it's a lot of their language I've picked up, I think. What I tend to settle, it changes all the time, and it changes from year to year, my own vocabulary. And my sense is that was the case with Stanislavski, that the language, not only with the language change, I think, with Stanislavski and with most practitioners, but the way you're using the language. So the meaning of a particular word shifts over time, or from situation to situation as well. Finally, for me, it's I keep changing the language until I see the students in the students' eyes that the word means something. And I usually ask the students to find their own word, the word that stimulates them the most. So, for example, translating from the Russian, the term I most have been familiar with for the longest is objective. But of course, there's goal and task and problem, and then through the Meisner tradition, things like wish, deep wish, a need. I think, again, this is personal to me, that the words that stimulate me to want to do something. I think that's what it is. It's the thing that incites one to action. And it's finding, for me, it's finding in the student the vocabulary that is most likely to incite them to action, or is most likely to incite their imagination, and the three things really: to incite their imagination and their emotional life, which in turn leads to change modify their behaviour and what they do. So it tends to be, I think, it's the words that are the most part of the vernacular of the particular language you're working in. So here the interesting thing is I'm finding myself having to find a more neutral language, I suppose, because I'm working with Maltese students and I think and Polish and yeah. Whereas when I'm working with English students, and again it depends on where in England and where and what age of the student and class background. So you're trying to find the language of the student, I think. That's the thing that I find is most effective. For me personally, need is powerful. Need, want is probably more powerful than goal, objective. Certainly more important than task. Task it seems, well, again, it depends what problem you're trying to solve. The good thing about a word like task is it produces physical action. Whereas a word like objective, the danger is that it becomes internal and intellectual. Whereas words like need and want are emotional, I suppose. So depending on the problem that I feel as a teacher I'm witnessing in the scene, I would modify the vocabulary in order to solve the particular problem. If the problem's emotional, words like desire, want and need are more useful. If the problem is about physical action, that I feel the student is not engaging in the physical action, then I'd use words like task and problem. If I think it's something that they don't understand the importance to the character intellectually, I might use words like objective. So it's fitting the language to the particular problem. The more I work with young actors, the more I think about acting as problem solving, and the more what I try to find is the most economic way of getting to the heart of the problem. So that the instruction, I worked with a director once who said to me, what's the note? So trying to move away from the director's desire to explain everything, find the single note that unlocks or that solves the problem. And I think probably the single word, if I think about it, that's most effective when working with actors is the word if. I think it's a single syllable. Cut straight to the imagination and the emotion, which drives the action. Because if people are trying too hard to intellectualize the problem, then or to work out what it's like to be the character, they can get bogged down with over-intellectualizing. But through the word if, you can go straight to the imagination. So what if this? Let's say it's not Macbeth killing Duncan. You're not in the 11th century trying to kill a king. That's difficult. What if it's this person that you, when you were 6, humiliated you and you hate more than anybody else in the world? What if it's them that you, or what if it's somebody, a political figure, that if only they weren't there, the world would be a better place? And immediately you connect to the actor's imagination. And again, the more that I work with actors, with young actors, the more I feel that the bottom line, the bottom requirement for an actor, or the definition of an actor, I feel an actor is by definition an abnormally imaginative creature who hasn't managed to suppress the imagination of childhood. Is so susceptible to their imagination that through imagination, they can affect the physiology of their body. They can sweat or blush or laugh or cry or shake. That their body is physiologically fooled through the power of the imagination. And I think the single word that gets to the heart of that most effectively is if, what if.
I would like to thank you, of course, for this series of workshops that you delivered to our students, and of course we look forward to host you in the future for other work within the program, as also within the research project of cultural transmission. Thank you.
Thank you very much.